My daughter-in-law unplugged my wife's oxygen machine to charge her phone. It's a sentence that sounds like a sick joke, a headline from some satirical newspaper designed to mock the absurd depths of human selfishness. But it wasn't a joke. It was the cold, hard axis upon which my entire world violently spun and then shattered. In the end, I was the one who unplugged her life, not with a moment of callous indifference, but with the slow, methodical precision of a man who had lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. Before the storm, there was the long, quiet calm of a life well lived. My wife, Eleanor, and I had been married for 51 years. We were that couple you see walking in the park, a little slower than we used to be, holding hands not just for affection, but for balance. Our love wasn't a roaring fire anymore. It was a bed of deep, warm embers that had glowed steadily for half a century. We had built our house together, not just financially, but literally. I was a carpenter by trade, and every floorboard, every window frame held a memory of our shared effort. Our son, Thomas, was our only child, the center of our universe for so long. Eleanor's health had been declining for a few years. She had COPD, a cruel disease that slowly steals the very air from your lungs. The house, once filled with her laughter and the smell of her baking, became a landscape of medical equipment. The most prominent feature was the oxygen concentrator, a humming, pulsing machine that was her lifeline. It sat in the corner of our living room, its long, clear tube, a constant umbilical cord connecting her to life. The gentle hiss of the oxygen flowing through the cannula was the new soundtrack to our days, a sound I came to associate with her continued existence. I learned to sleep through its rhythmic cycling, and on the rare nights she stayed with my sister so I could get a full night's rest, the silence was so deafening it kept me awake. Thomas had married Chloe 7 years ago. From the beginning, I had my reservations. Eleanor, ever the optimist, saw a vibrant, ambitious young woman. I saw something else. I saw a hardness in her eyes, a calculating glint that never quite matched her dazzling smile. She was obsessed with appearances, with status, with the curated perfection of her social media life. Her conversations were peppered with brand names and the vacation spots of her wealthy friends. She treated Thomas less like a partner and more like an accessory, a handsome, agreeable man who looked good in photos and didn't challenge her. My son, my dear Thomas, had always been a gentle soul. It was a quality I loved in him, but one that Chloe seemed to exploit. He was caught in her orbit, pulled along by the sheer force of her personality, often looking dazed and vaguely apologetic, as if he knew something was wrong, but lacked the vocabulary or the courage to name it. He loved his mother, I never doubted that. But his loyalty was fractured, torn between the woman who gave him life and the woman who now defined it. Chloe's visits were always an event. She would sweep into our quiet home like a whirlwind of expensive perfume and thinly veiled condescension. She'd compliment the house in a way that made it sound like a charming but dilapidated museum. "Oh, Arthur, I just love these vintage touches," she'd say, running a manicured finger over a piece of furniture I'd built with my own hands. She called my wife's condition unfortunate and spoke about the oxygen machine as an eyesore. "Couldn't you get a smaller one?" she asked once, wrinkling her nose. "They have portable ones now. This thing is just so industrial." Eleanor just smiled weakly. "This is the one the insurance covers, dear, and it does the job." I saw the flash of annoyance in Chloe's eyes before it was replaced by a saccharine smile. "Of course, Eleanor. Your health is the most important thing." But her tone said otherwise. Her tone said, "Your health is an inconvenience to my aesthetic sensibilities." The week it happened was difficult. Eleanor had a bad flare-up, and her breathing was more labored than usual. The doctor had increased her oxygen flow rate, and the concentrator's hum seemed more insistent, more desperate. She was mostly confined to her recliner in the living room, a book resting unread in her lap, her eyes often closed in exhaustion. Thomas and Chloe were supposed to come for dinner that Friday. Chloe called that afternoon to cancel. "Something's come up, Arthur," she said, her voice breezy and unapologetic. "A last-minute gallery opening. You understand." I didn't, but I said I did. It was easier than arguing. "Your mother isn't feeling her best anyway," I told her. "Oh, poor thing. Give her our love. she chirped, and I could hear the clinking of glasses in the background. She was already at a pre-gallery cocktail hour. The call ended. That night, Eleanor's condition worsened dramatically. Her breathing became shallow, and a bluish tint colored her lips. I called for an ambulance. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and the cold, sterile panic of an emergency room. They stabilized her and moved her to a private room in the intensive care unit. The doctor, a kind but weary-looking man, told me it was a severe exacerbation, complicated by a secondary infection. "She's resting now," he said, his hand on my shoulder. "The next 48 hours are critical. We have her on a high-flow nasal cannula, which is much more powerful than her machine at home. We just need to wait and see if her lungs can recover." I sat by her bedside, holding her frail, cool hand. The room was filled with the rhythmic beeping and whirring of machines that were now her entire world. I called Thomas. He sounded frantic, guilty. "Oh God, Dad, we should have been there. We're on our way." They arrived an hour later. Thomas looked pale and genuinely distressed. He hugged me tightly, tears in his eyes. Chloe stood back, her arms crossed, a mask of concerned solemnity on her face that looked as if it had been put on with her makeup. "How is she?" she asked in a stage whisper. "She's fighting," I said, my voice hoarse. We sat in a strained silence for a while. Thomas held his mother's other hand, his head bowed. Chloe, however, was restless. She paced the small room, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. She kept checking her phone, her thumb scrolling endlessly. The blatant disrespect of it, the inability to be present in a moment of such gravity, sent a hot spike of anger through my grief. "Chloe, please," I murmured. "Just sit." She shot me a look of irritation before composing her features again. "Sorry, it's just work. It never stops." She sat down, but her legs started jiggling, a nervous, impatient rhythm that grated on my raw nerves. After another hour, a nurse came in to check Eleanor's vitals. "She's stable," the nurse, a young woman named Sarah with kind, tired eyes, told us. "It's best if she gets as much rest as possible. Maybe you all should go home for a bit, get some sleep. We have your number. We'll call with any change." Thomas looked at me. "Dad, she's right. You look exhausted." I didn't want to leave, but I knew he was right. I felt 100 years old. "All right, but you call me. Anything. The middle of the night, I don't care." "Of course," Thomas promised. I decided to stay a little longer, to have a few more quiet minutes with Eleanor. "You two go ahead," I said. "I'll be home in a bit." Thomas kissed his mother's forehead and then hugged me again. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son." Chloe approached the bed, hesitating for a moment before patting Eleanor's arm awkwardly. "Get well soon, Eleanor," she said, her voice lacking any genuine warmth. Then she turned to leave. As she walked past the wall where Eleanor's primary monitors and oxygen supply were plugged in, she paused. I watched, vaguely curious, as she scanned the wall socket. There were two outlets, both occupied. One was for the large, complex machine, monitoring Eleanor's heart rate, blood pressure, and blood oxygen saturation. The other was for the hospital-grade oxygen delivery system. Both were clearly marked with red tape and hospital warnings. Essential medical equipment. Do not unplug. Chloe looked at her phone, then back at the wall. A small frown creased her brow. My mind, foggy with exhaustion and worry, didn't immediately process what she was contemplating. It seemed impossible, unthinkable. She reached down. With a casual, almost dismissive motion, she yanked the plug for the oxygen system out of the wall. The steady, life-giving hiss of air flowing to Eleanor stopped. The sudden silence was more shocking than a gunshot. In its place, the primary monitor began to emit a low, urgent beep as Eleanor's oxygen saturation level, deprived of its source, began to plummet. Chloe, oblivious, plugged her phone charger into the now vacant outlet and attached her phone. A self-satisfied little smile touched her lips as she saw the charging icon appear. I froze. For a full second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes had just seen. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated horror. The world narrowed to that single obscene act. The beeping of the monitor grew faster, more frantic. A red light started flashing. Something inside me snapped. The exhaustion, the grief, the years of quiet resentment, it all coalesced into a single explosive point of pure, white-hot rage. "What did you do?" My voice was a choked whisper. Chloe looked up, startled, an expression of annoyance on her face. "What? My phone was dying." She didn't understand. She genuinely did not comprehend the magnitude of her action. To her, it was a simple matter of priorities, and her phone's battery life had won. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I moved. I lunged across the small space, shoving her aside. My hands, trembling with adrenaline, fumbled for the plug. I jammed it back into the socket. The hiss of oxygen returned, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. The nurse, Sarah, burst into the room, drawn by the alarms. "What happened? The central monitor went crazy." I was breathing heavily, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe, who was now pressed against the far wall, a look of stunned indignation on her face. She unplugged it," I gasped, the words catching in my throat. "She unplugged the oxygen to charge her phone." Nurse Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked from the wall socket to Chloe, to the rapidly stabilizing numbers on the monitor. The color drained from her face. She understood. She saw the truth of it. "Get out," Sarah said, her voice low and trembling with fury. She wasn't speaking to me. She was looking at Chloe. "Get out of this room, now." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself. "It was just for a second. I didn't know." "Out!" Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Thomas, who had been in the hallway, rushed back in. "What's going on?" Chloe ran to him, grabbing his arm. "Your father is crazy. He attacked me, and this nurse is hysterical." But Sarah was already by my side, her hand on my arm. "Sir, are you all right?" "Sir." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at Eleanor. Her face, which had taken on a terrifying gray pallor in those few seconds, was slowly regaining its color. But something had changed. The steady rhythm of her breathing, shallow as it was, had faltered. The monitor that had been beeping about her oxygen was now sounding a different, more ominous alarm, a flat, continuous tone. The doctor rushed in, followed by another nurse. A code was called. They swarmed the bed. "Get them out of here," someone shouted. I was gently but firmly guided out into the hallway. Thomas and Chloe were already there, Chloe now weeping theatrically into Thomas's shoulder. I just stood there, numb, my back against the cool wall, listening to the frantic, muffled sounds from inside the room. The sound of people fighting for a life that had been so casually, so thoughtlessly jeopardized. It was too late. The brief period of severe hypoxia had been too much for her already weakened heart and lungs. The doctor came out 20 minutes later, his face a grim mask. He didn't need to say the words. I knew. Eleanor was gone. And in that moment, staring at the closed door of her room, I felt the embers of my old life go cold. And in their place, something new and terrible began to smolder. It wasn't just grief. It was a cold, hard, clarifying rage. My daughter-in-law hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't been thoughtless. She had, in her profound and monstrous selfishness, killed my wife. The days that followed were a thick, suffocating fog of grief and logistics. Planning a funeral for the love of your life is a uniquely cruel exercise in administrative pain. Every choice, the casket, the flowers, the music, was a fresh stab of agony, a reminder of the future that had been stolen. Thomas was a ghost. He drifted through the arrangements, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He was trapped in an impossible position, grieving his mother while tethered to the woman responsible for her death. Chloe, for her part, played the role of the bereaved daughter-in-law with an unnerving, theatrical perfection. She wore black, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. She brought casseroles, fielded phone calls, and hugged relatives, her performance seamless and utterly nauseating. She tried to talk to me several times, to clear the air, as she put it. "Arthur, I am so sorry for the misunderstanding in the hospital," she said, catching me in the hallway of my own home. Her eyes were wide and pleading, but I saw no genuine remorse in them. I saw only fear, fear of the consequences, fear of her perfect life being disrupted. "There was no misunderstanding, Chloe," I said, my voice flat and dead. I saw what you did. It was an accident. I was distraught. I wasn't thinking. I would never, ever hurt Eleanor. I loved her. The lie was so bald, so audacious, that it left me breathless. I just stared at her, the rage from the hospital room now cooled into something harder, something more durable. It was like steel. "Leave me alone," I said, and walked away. The funeral was a surreal nightmare. I stood by the grave, listening to the minister speak of Eleanor's kindness, her warmth, her grace. I watched as my friends and family wept, and I saw Chloe standing next to my son, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. She was an actress playing a part in a tragedy she had authored. After everyone had left, I stayed behind. I sat on the cold ground next to the freshly turned earth, the scent of lilies and damp soil filling the air. The silence of the cemetery was a profound relief after days of forced condolences and whispered sympathies. It was in that silence that the decision formed. It wasn't a hot-blooded desire for revenge. It was a cold, clear imperative for justice. Chloe had taken a life, not with a weapon, but with a phone charger and a soul utterly devoid of empathy. The world saw it as a tragic accident, a misunderstanding. Thomas was too weak and conflicted to act. The hospital, while sympathetic, was focused on its own liability and protocols. The nurse, Sarah, had given a statement, but it was my word against Chloe's frantic, tearful denials. Without an autopsy that could definitively prove that the few seconds of oxygen deprivation were the sole cause of death, an almost impossible task, it was a case of he said, she said. But I knew. And I knew that letting her get away with it, letting her walk back into her perfect life with my son, would be the final, ultimate betrayal of Eleanor's memory. She had unplugged my wife. I would unplug her, not her breath, her life, the carefully constructed, materialistic, fraudulent life she held so dear. When I returned home, the house felt cavernous and cold. Eleanor's presence was everywhere and nowhere at once. Her scent lingered on her pillow. Her favorite shawl was still draped over the recliner, which now sat empty, its silence a scream. The oxygen concentrator in the corner was dark and quiet. I walked over and unplugged it, coiling the cord with a sense of finality. I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation, moving through the motions of existence. But my mind was working. It was sharper and clearer than it had been in years. The fog of grief was still there, a heavy blanket, but beneath it, a plan was beginning to take shape. I was a carpenter. I knew how to build things. Now, I would learn how to dismantle them. My first step was to understand the enemy. I had always disliked Chloe, but I had never truly studied her. Now, I did. I thought back over every conversation, every visit, every little slight and casual cruelty. I remembered her constant complaints about money, despite the fact that she and Thomas lived a life far beyond what his modest salary as an architect should have allowed. I remembered her bragging about investments, about a portfolio she was managing. Thomas had once mentioned, with a hint of confusion, that Chloe handled all their finances. "She's brilliant with that stuff," he'd said, way over my head. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced through my grief. Eleanor and I weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had our savings, the house was paid off, and we had a decent retirement fund I'd built up over 50 years of hard work. We had set up wills and a power of attorney years ago, naming Thomas as our sole beneficiary and executor. It was all straightforward, or it should have been. I went to the old metal lockbox in my study where we kept our important documents. My hands trembled as I sorted through the files, birth certificates, marriage license, the deed to the house, and there it was, the folder labeled Wills and POA. I opened it. Eleanor's will was there. My will was there. But the power of attorney document felt wrong. I remembered the day we signed it, at a small lawyer's office downtown, maybe 10 years ago. I remembered the lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy, a kind man with a walrus mustache. This document was different. It was dated just 6 months prior, and it wasn't the simple, durable power of attorney naming Thomas. This was a complex, multi-page document that granted general and specific powers to a new agent. My eyes scanned the page until they found the name, Chloe Dubois, my daughter-in-law, and beneath it, 2 signatures. One was mine, looking shaky and unfamiliar. The other was Eleanor's. But it wasn't Eleanor's signature. In her final years, her hand had been afflicted with arthritis, her elegant cursive reduced to a cramped, spidery script. This signature was smooth, flowing, and utterly fraudulent. It was an imitation of her signature from years ago, a poor forgery. My blood ran cold. I sat down heavily in my desk chair, the papers rattling in my hand. This wasn't just about a moment of selfish negligence in a hospital room. This was premeditated. This was a long con. Chloe had been systematically positioning herself to take control of our assets. The document gave her sweeping powers, the ability to buy, sell, and manage all our property and finances, effective immediately upon the incapacitation of either me or Eleanor. Eleanor's final illness was her incapacitation. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The constant questions about our finances, the brilliant portfolio she was managing, the forged document, and the final, accidental act in the hospital. Had she known? Had she thought that with Eleanor gone and me consumed by grief, she could quietly step in and take everything? Did she think I wouldn't notice? She saw me as a doddering old man, a relic in a museum. She had underestimated me. That was her first and final mistake. The grief in my heart was now intertwined with a core of ice. This was no longer just about justice for Eleanor's death. It was about protecting everything we had built together from a vulture. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the family lawyer. His name, I noted, was not on this new, fraudulent document. Instead, I called a friend, a retired judge I played chess with on Wednesdays. "Henry," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need a lawyer, not a nice one. I need a shark." The next day, I was sitting in the downtown office of a man named Marcus Davies. The office was modern, all glass and steel, a world away from the dusty, wood-paneled rooms I was used to. Davies was a man in his late 40s, sharp, impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened to my story without interruption, his face impassive. I told him everything. I told him about Eleanor, about the oxygen machine, about the nurse's testimony. Then I placed the forged power of attorney on his gleaming mahogany desk. He picked it up, his movements precise. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. He held it up to the light. He ran a finger over the signatures. Finally, he placed it back on the desk and looked at me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice calm and even, "this is not a family squabble. This is a criminal conspiracy." A wave of relief so profound it almost made me weep washed over me. He believed me. He saw it. "Her actions in the hospital," he continued, "could be construed as negligent homicide or even second-degree manslaughter, depending on what a prosecutor believes they can prove about her state of mind. It's difficult, but not impossible, especially with the nurse's corroboration." He tapped the fraudulent document. "This, however, this is the key. Forgery, fraud, attempted grand larceny. This is concrete. This is provable. And when you put the two together, you get a narrative that is so compellingly evil, no jury will be able to look away." "What do we do?" I asked. "We do nothing," he said, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. "For now, we let her think she has gotten away with it. We let her think you are just a sad old man, lost in his grief. Hubris is the most valuable asset a litigator can have in an opponent, and your daughter-in-law, Mr. Thorne, sounds like she has it in spades." His plan was simple and brutal. "She believes she has power of attorney," he explained. "She will try to use it. When she does, she will be committing a felony in real time. We will be waiting." He told me to go home and act the part, to be broken, to be confused, to let Thomas and Chloe help me. In the meantime, he would begin the work. He would hire a handwriting expert. He would track down the notary public whose stamp was on the document. He was willing to bet a significant sum that the notary was either fake or had been duped. And he would prepare a case to be presented not just to civil court, but to the district attorney's office. "Unplugging her life, Mr. Thorne," he said, echoing my own thoughts with an eerie prescience, "is not about a single act of vengeance. It's about a systematic dismantling of her entire fraudulent existence. We will take her money. We will take her reputation. And then we will take her freedom." I walked out of that office into the bright afternoon sun, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted. The path forward was clear. The rage was no longer a consuming fire. It was a focused, controlled burn, fueling the engine of a machine that was now grinding inexorably towards Chloe. I went home and I played my part. The following weeks were a masterclass in deception. I allowed Thomas to visit, to fuss over me. He'd bring groceries and ask if I was eating. His guilt was a palpable thing, a heavy cloak he wore at all times. He was trying to atone for his mother's death by taking care of me, and I let him. It was cruel in a way, but necessary. Chloe came with him, her performance of the caring daughter-in-law now polished to a high sheen. She'd fluff my pillows, offer to organize my paperwork, her eyes scanning my study with a greedy proprietary air. "Arthur, you really shouldn't be worrying about bills and things right now," she said one afternoon, her voice dripping with false concern. "Why don't you let me handle all of that? I'm good with numbers. We can just simplify things for you." There it was, the opening gambit. I looked at her, my face a mask of weary confusion. "Oh, I don't know, Chloe. It's all so complicated." "Exactly. That's why you should let me take care of it. In fact," she added, as if the thought had just occurred to her, "I think you and Eleanor signed something a while back, giving me the ability to help out if a situation like this ever arose, a power of attorney." I feigned ignorance. "Did we? I can't recall. My memory has been so foggy." "Yes, I'm almost certain of it," she said, her eyes bright with triumph. "I'll have a look for the paperwork. It would make everything so much easier for you." I watched her, a predator circling what she believed to be wounded prey. "If you say so, dear," I said meekly. "Whatever you think is best." She patted my hand, her touch feeling like a spider crawling on my skin. "Don't you worry about a thing, Arthur. I'll get it all sorted." She left that day with a smug, victorious smile. I immediately called Davies. "She's taken the bait," I said. "Excellent," he replied, his voice crisp and businesslike. "Now, we wait for her to make a move. I've already put alerts on all your accounts and on the title for your property. The moment she tries to access anything, we'll know." Meanwhile, Davies' investigation was bearing fruit. The handwriting expert confirmed that both my signature and Eleanor's were forgeries, and skillful ones at that. "Practiced" was the word he used. This wasn't a one-time attempt. She had likely spent hours tracing and mimicking our handwriting. Even more damning, Davies' investigator had tracked down the notary public. She was a young woman who worked at a mail and ship store. She was terrified. When shown the document, she admitted that Chloe had brought it in, claiming her in-laws were in the car, too frail to come inside. Chloe had shown her fake IDs, convincing ones, and the young notary, busy and inexperienced, had stamped the document without ever laying eyes on me or Eleanor. It was a violation of protocol, but one born of gullibility, not malice. She was more than willing to testify against Chloe in exchange for immunity. We also reached out to Nurse Sarah. Davies had an investigator from his firm meet with her discreetly. She was hesitant at first, afraid of losing her job, but her conscience was heavy. She wrote a detailed, signed affidavit of everything she witnessed in the hospital room. Chloe's indifference, the act of unplugging the machine, her callous excuse, and the immediate, catastrophic effect on Eleanor's vitals. It was a powerful, emotional account from a medical professional. The final piece was the finances. Davies had me sign a release, and his forensic accountant began digging into Chloe and Thomas's life. What they found was staggering. Chloe had been living a lie for years. They were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on their condo, high-interest personal loans. The lavish lifestyle, the designer clothes, the exotic vacations. It was all a house of cards, funded by debt and the desperate hope of a future inheritance. My inheritance. She wasn't just greedy, she was desperate. Her motive wasn't just a desire for more, it was a need to plug a massive, hemorrhaging hole in her own finances. My house, my savings, were her only way out. About 3 weeks after the funeral, the trap was sprung. I received a call from my bank. A polite but firm woman from the fraud department was on the line. "Mr. Thorne, we're calling to verify a request we received today. Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Chloe Dubois, is attempting to add her name to your primary checking and savings accounts, citing power of attorney. She is also requesting a wire transfer of $50,000 to her personal account to, in her words, consolidate and manage your assets. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. I did not authorize that, I said, my voice steady. That's what we suspected, sir. The power of attorney document she presented has been flagged by our legal team. There are some irregularities. We have put a freeze on all your accounts and denied her request pending your direct confirmation. We've also scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning with Ms. Dubois and our branch manager to discuss the matter. We would need you to be present. I'll be there, I said. My next call was to Davies. It's happening, I told him. I know, he said. I've already been in touch with the bank's legal department. They are cooperating fully. I've also had a chat with the district attorney's office. They are very interested in our story. A detective will be waiting in the wings tomorrow. He paused, and for the first time, I heard a hint of something other than professional detachment in his voice. Are you ready for this, Arthur? I thought of Eleanor. I thought of her smile, the warmth of her hand in mine, the gentle hiss of the machine that had kept her with me. And I thought of the sudden, terrible silence when it was ripped away. I'm ready, I said. Let's unplug her. The next morning, I dressed in my best suit, the one I had worn to my son's wedding. It felt appropriate. It was the suit I wore to welcome Chloe into our family. It would be the suit I wore to watch her being cast out. Davies picked me up. He was, as always, the picture of calm competence. Remember the plan, Arthur, he said as we drove. You say nothing. You let her talk. You let her incriminate herself. When the time is right, I will handle everything. You are just the grieving husband, confused and overwhelmed. I understand, I said, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We arrived at the bank. We were shown into a large, glass-walled conference room. The branch manager, a stern-looking woman named Ms. Albright, was already there. She greeted us with a curt nod. Davies and I sat on one side of the long, polished table. We waited. 5 minutes later, Chloe arrived. She was not alone. With her was a young, slick-looking man in a suit that was a size too tight. He had the overconfident swagger of a man who watches too many legal dramas on television. Chloe was beaming. She was radiating confidence. She had won. In her mind, this meeting was a mere formality, the last bureaucratic hurdle before she gained access to her prize. Arthur, she exclaimed, rushing over to me. I'm so glad you're here, and you brought a friend. How lovely. She gave Davies a dismissive glance, assuming he was just a companion I'd brought for moral support. This is my lawyer, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet. A flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossed her face. A lawyer? Oh, Arthur, that's not necessary. This is just family business. This is my brother Leo. He's here to help me sort through the paperwork. Leo. Of course. Her arrogant, vapid brother who shared her sense of entitlement. He gave us a smug smirk and sat down next to her, looking important. Miss Albright cleared her throat. Let's begin. Ms. Dubois, we have your request to be added to Mr. Thorne's accounts based on this power of attorney document. She slid a copy across the table. Our legal team has raised some concerns. Chloe laughed, a brittle, condescending sound. Concerns? It's a standard POA. Everything is perfectly legal. Arthur and Eleanor signed it themselves. They wanted me to be able to help manage things when the time came. And sadly, that time is now. She looked at me, her eyes full of fake pity. Arthur has been so lost since Eleanor passed. He's not in a state to handle these things. Leo chimed in, his voice oozing with false sincerity. We're just trying to help. We want to make sure Arthur is taken care of, that his assets are properly managed. He's family. Ms. Albright looked at me. I remained silent, my face a carefully blank mask of sorrow, just as Davies had instructed. Davies leaned forward. Ms. Dubois, he said, his voice soft but carrying an edge of steel. My client, Mr. Thorne, has no recollection of signing this document. Could you perhaps remind us of the circumstances? Chloe was momentarily flustered by the direct challenge, but she recovered quickly. Of course, it was about 6 months ago. We all went to a notary. Arthur's memory is just not what it used to be. The grief, you know. I see, Davies said. And Eleanor Thorne was there as well? She signed it in your presence? Yes, absolutely, Chloe said, her voice firm. She was a consummate liar. That's interesting, Davies said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a file. Because we have a signed, notarized affidavit from the notary on record, a Ms. Jessica Gable, who states that she never met Arthur or Eleanor Thorne. She states that you came to her alone, with falsified identification, and fraudulently obtained her seal. The silence that fell in the room was like a physical slab of concrete. Chloe's confident smile froze, then crumbled. Her face went pale. Leo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's a lie, Chloe stammered. She's lying. She must be mistaken, Davies continued, his voice relentless. We also have a report from a court-certified handwriting expert who confirms with 99.9% certainty that the signatures of both Arthur and Eleanor Thorne on this document are forgeries. He slid another paper across the table. It was the expert's report, with our real signatures and the forgeries side by side, the discrepancies circled in red. Chloe stared at it, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color had completely drained from her face. And finally, Davies said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we have the matter of the $50,000 wire transfer you attempted to make this morning from my client's account into your own. An account, I might add, that our forensic accountant has determined is part of a portfolio of debt totaling over $300,000. He let that hang in the air. Ms. Albright, the bank manager, was now staring at Chloe with open contempt. Leo finally spoke, his bravado gone, replaced by a panicked squeak. This is harassment. You can't talk to my sister like that. But Chloe wasn't listening. Her composure had completely shattered. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted between Davies, me, and the door. She was a cornered animal. It's his fault, she suddenly shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's a senile old man. He's trying to frame me. He never liked me. He was always jealous of my relationship with Thomas. Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. I was helping. I loved Eleanor. I did everything for them. And this is the thanks I get? You're trying to ruin my life. It was at that moment that I finally spoke. I looked directly at her, not with rage, but with a cold, quiet finality. You unplugged her oxygen, Chloe, I said. The words were quiet, but they cut through her hysteria like a razor. She flinched as if I had struck her. Davies placed one last document on the table. This is a sworn affidavit from Nurse Sarah Jenkins, the ICU nurse on duty the night Eleanor Thorne died. It details how she witnessed you unplug your mother-in-law's oxygen supply in order to charge your cellular phone and your subsequent claim that you didn't know what the machine was for. Chloe made a sound, a strangled, guttural noise of pure despair. The last of her lies had been stripped away. She was naked, exposed, her monstrous selfishness laid bare for everyone to see. Miss Albright picked up her phone. Security, she said into it, and please let Detective Miller know we are ready for him. Chloe's head snapped up. Detective? She whispered, the word barely audible. The conference room door opened, and two uniformed security guards stepped in, followed by a plainclothes detective who flashed a badge. He walked calmly over to Chloe, who was now trembling uncontrollably. Chloe Dubois, the detective said, his voice calm and official. You are under arrest for forgery, attempted grand larceny, and felony fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As he recited the Miranda rights, Chloe completely fell apart. She began to sob, not tears of remorse, but tears of pure, unadulterated self-pity. No, no, Thomas. Somebody call Thomas. This is a mistake. Leo, her brother, had shrunk into his chair, looking pale and sick. He wanted no part of this. He looked at his sister as if she were a stranger. The security guards helped her to her feet. As they led her out of the room, a handcuffed, weeping, pathetic mess, her eyes met mine one last time. In them, I saw no understanding, no apology. I saw only a bottomless, venomous hatred. She still didn't get it. She still thought she was the victim. I just watched her go. I felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound, grim satisfaction. The machine of justice, which I had set in motion, had done its work. The life she had built on lies and greed had been unplugged. The room was quiet after she was gone. Davies put a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Arthur." I took a deep breath, the first truly full breath I had taken in weeks. "No," I said, thinking of the legal battles still to come. "It's just the beginning." But I knew the worst was behind me. The truth was out, and the truth I was discovering was a powerful, cleansing thing. The aftermath was messy but swift. The news of Chloe's arrest spread like wildfire through our family and community. The story was so lurid, so shocking, that it became a local sensation. "The phone charger killer," one tabloid headline called her, a nickname that was both crude and chillingly accurate. The district attorney's office, armed with Davies' meticulously prepared case, moved decisively. They charged Chloe with everything they could: multiple counts of forgery and fraud, attempted grand larceny, and, to my surprise, second-degree manslaughter. The prosecutor argued that her act of unplugging the oxygen machine in a critical care setting with clear warnings posted demonstrated a depraved indifference to human life that elevated it beyond mere negligence. Her brother, Leo, in a desperate attempt to save his own skin, gave a full statement to the police, confirming Chloe's financial desperation and her obsession with getting her hands on our money. He painted her as a manipulative monster, throwing her under the bus to avoid any hint of conspiracy charges. So much for family. The most difficult part was Thomas. He called me the day after the arrest. He was incoherent, sobbing down the phone line. "Dad, I can't believe it. Is it true? All of it?" "Yes, son," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's all true." There was a long, ragged silence. I could hear his shattered breathing. "The money, the forging, I can almost understand it. She was always so stressed about money. But Mom, Dad, she told me it was an accident. She swore to me." "It wasn't an accident, Thomas," I said quietly. "It was a choice. She chose her phone over your mother's life." The rawness of the statement hung between us. He broke down completely then, a gut-wrenching sound of a man whose entire reality had been torn apart. He had been betrayed by the woman he loved, and he was forced to confront the fact that he had stood by and defended his mother's killer. "What do I do, Dad?" he whispered, his voice small and broken. "What do I do?" "That's for you to decide, son," I told him. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to say. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but it was. Not for what Chloe did, but for his own willful blindness, for the years he spent enabling her, for choosing her comfort over his own integrity. This was his reckoning, and he had to face it alone. He filed for divorce a week later. Chloe's legal team, funded by what little money her parents could scrape together, tried to fight back. They claimed I was a vindictive old man, that the nurse was mistaken, that the notary was lying, that the forgeries were done by someone else. But the evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of facts that could not be moved. Davies was magnificent. He preempted every one of their moves. He filed a civil suit on my behalf to formally nullify the power of attorney and to recover any and all funds Chloe had ever siphoned from Thomas that could be traced back to gifts or support from me and Eleanor. He put a lien on their condo, ensuring it couldn't be sold off to pay her legal fees. He dismantled her life with the same methodical precision I had used to build my house. Chloe tried to reach me one last time. A few months after her arrest, while she was out on bail and awaiting trial, she called the house. I almost didn't answer, but some morbid curiosity made me pick up. "Arthur?" Her voice was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former confidence. I said nothing. "Arthur, please," she begged. "You have to stop this. You've ruined me. I've lost everything. My husband, my home. My life is over." "Your life isn't over, Chloe," I said, my voice as cold and empty as a winter sky. "You still have one. My wife doesn't." "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "A terrible, terrible mistake. I'm sorry. Can't you see I'm sorry?" I listened to her manufactured tears, her pathetic pleas, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, hollow emptiness where she was concerned. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. "Goodbye, Chloe," I said, and I hung up the phone. I walked over to the old landline on the wall and unplugged it from its socket. I didn't need it anymore. The trial was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the testimony of the nurse, the notary, and her own brother, Chloe had no choice but to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to forgery and fraud. She also pleaded no contest to the manslaughter charge, a legal maneuver to avoid the spectacle of a full trial that she knew she would lose. The judge, a woman with piercing eyes and a reputation for being tough but fair, was not impressed. At the sentencing, she looked down at Chloe, who stood before her, a shrunken, pathetic figure. "Ms. Dubois," the judge said, her voice ringing with contempt, "your crimes are not merely financial. They represent a profound moral rot. You forged documents to steal from the parents of the man you claim to love, and through an act of selfishness, so staggering it almost defies belief, you contributed to the death of a helpless, sick woman. You have shown no genuine remorse, only self-pity. You are a predator who cloaked herself in the guise of family." I was in the courtroom, sitting in the front row. I watched as the sentence was handed down. 10 years in a state penitentiary. With parole, she would likely be out in 7. 7 years. It didn't feel like enough for a life, but it was something. It was a public branding. It was the final, official unplugging of the life she had known. As they led her away, she looked older, her face puffy from crying, her expensive clothes replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit. She was no longer the vibrant, dazzling woman who had captivated my son. She was just a common criminal. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. For the first time since Eleanor's death, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't happiness. I knew happiness was a country I might never visit again, but it was peace. Justice had been done. Eleanor's memory had been honored. Months have passed since then. The seasons have turned. Spring has come, and the garden Eleanor and I planted together is beginning to bloom. The daffodils are pushing through the soil, bright yellow splashes of life against the dark earth. I spend most of my days out there, my hands in the dirt. It's quiet work. It's honest work. I weed and I water, and I think about my 51 years with Eleanor. I think about the life we built and the legacy we left. Thomas has started visiting again. Our relationship is tentative, fragile. He's a changed man. The weakness and indecision have been burned out of him, replaced by a quiet, somber strength. He is in therapy, trying to understand his own complicity, his own blindness. He sold the condo and moved into a small, modest apartment. He works. He pays his debts. He is trying to rebuild his life from the ground up, on a foundation of truth this time. We don't talk about Chloe. There's nothing left to say. She is a ghost from a past that nearly destroyed us both. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden, I'll stop and look back at the house I built with my own 2 hands. It's quiet now. The humming of the oxygen machine is gone. The sound of Chloe's brittle laughter is a distant, faded echo. There is only the wind in the trees and the chirping of birds. I did not seek revenge in a fit of rage. I sought justice with cold, clear-eyed deliberation. I used the system that Chloe sought to manipulate and turned it against her. I took away her power, her status, her freedom, the only things she ever truly valued. I unplugged the life support from her fraudulent existence, and I watched it flatline. Some might call what I did cruel. Some might call it vindictive. But as I stand here, in the quiet peace of my garden, with the memory of my wife's love as my only companion, I know I did the only thing I could do. I did it for Eleanor. I did it to honor the 51 years of love and life that a monster tried to erase for the sake of a fully charged battery. It wasn't about ending her life. It was about affirming my wife's. And in that, I find my peace. I protected our home. I protected her memory. And I finally brought her justice.